Welcome to Sculpture Vulture. I'm Lucy Branch, a sculptural conservator and author, bringing you a series of interviews with some amazing sculptors who inspire me, and I hope will do the same for you. You can see the photographs accompanying the interview, the episode show notes, and get a free novel from sculpturevulture.co.uk. Hello, Sculpture Vultures, and thank you for joining me today. We're nearly at the end of the first series and I can't believe it. It may have seemed short to you, but with the behind the scenes work that goes on with a podcast, it's been a hard few months for me. Made harder, I might add, because foolishly, I took it on at a time when I should have been finishing my current novel. I was over a year into the novel before I even began thinking about this podcast, but somehow I just got carried away with the whole thing, and suddenly I've been trying to run two quite substantial things alongside each other, which inevitably meant that one ended up giving way. So Restoration Murder, which was due out in November 2020, had to be postponed until March 2021. Now, that's not the end of the world, but note to self, don't try to do two huge projects at once on top of a global pandemic, running a business and looking after and being part of a fairly large and complicated family. So this intro is a little bit different to my others, maybe that I'm a little bit more of a seasoned podcaster now. I'm gaining more confidence to talk directly to you rather than just at you. But as we're so close to the end of the season, I've been thinking about whether I'll bring the podcast back for another season or perhaps do it in a slightly different mode. Maybe some episodes about what's happening in the world of sculpture, what I'm up to with my sculpture conservation business and writing, and who I've heard is doing interesting things. I thought I could drop a few interviews in between those kind of episodes with some of the brilliant sculptors that I have my eyes on. So what do you think about that? Please drop me a line at lucy@antiquebronze.co.uk or tweet me, lucybranch11. I'd love to get your feedback on what you've enjoyed in the season, what your thoughts are for the next season, and even if there's been a few bits you found dull. I hope that's not the case, but my hide is tough enough, I believe, and I think constructive criticism was always a good thing. So Louisa Forbes, who was interviewed in the last episode, has asked me to give a shout out to the Society of Portrait Sculptors. Anyone who appreciates sculpture would enjoy their website, and when COVID isn't darkening our days, they have magnificent exhibitions. Do take a look at their website, www.portrait-sculpture.org.uk. They are a representative body of professional sculptors with wide variety of talents who are all committed to portrait and figurative sculpture to be accessible to the wider public. And there are some incredible artists to discover there. They have an annual exhibition, and if you're interested, they will tell you where you can access portrait sculpture classes. And they have an annual lecture if you'd like to learn more about sculpture. In 2019, the lecture was given by Martin Jennings, who you should know well by now, who has starred on the Sculpture Vulture podcast. You can see his lecture online if you're interested by just going into their website. Right, let's get on with the order of the day, which is to introduce you to Jason deCaires Taylor, who is a sculptor and environmentalist and professional underwater photographer. He has permanent site-specific work spanning several continents and predominantly explores submerged and tidal marine environments. He's the only sculptor that I have included who does not work in bronze, and that's just because he's so fantastic. I had to include him, and you definitely need to know about him. Not only is his work utterly fascinating, but also he has a really deep understanding of the crisis that humanity is facing with the damage that they're doing to the environment. And the fact he enables expression of this through sculpture, I think, is well worth listening to. And so I began our conversation today by asking him if he'd always been creative.
No, not necessarily. No, I actually started my art career much later on in life. I studied sculpture at university, but then after that I sort of did a whole range of different professions, and none of which were particularly creative. But it was only later on in life that I managed to make it a full-time profession.
What sent you off to art school then?
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, I come from a family that there's many many painters and sculptors, and generally, we've always been involved in some way in the creative arts. But yeah, I think it was a really sort of natural choice for me to go to university. It was, when you're at that age and you're sort of weighing up all the different options of what to do in life, I kind of just went with what I enjoyed the most and what I loved doing, and it was certainly art.
So family being artistic, quite happy for you to do that. That's not always the case.
No, I was very lucky. I had parents that really encouraged me to sort of follow my own vocation. No, some people are not as fortunate, but for me it kind of really worked out.
What did you do that after you left university?
Many different things. It was quite a sort of interesting path. I mean, I studied sculpture and ceramics at Camberwell College of Arts, and after that, I actually sort of had that dreaded feeling like, oh my God, how am I going to make a living out of this? And and I actually found it quite sort of, the equation of taking on jobs maybe that I didn't like too much, but they paid the bills, and I always kind of wanted the creative part to be free and not constrained in any way, which I suppose everybody does, but practically speaking, it's not always possible. So I sort of really turned against it, and I thought I'm just going to try some other different types of jobs and see what I enjoyed doing, and all sorts. I did a stint as a diving instructor. I did a bit as a paparazzi photographer. Some time building big sets for theatres and concerts. Worked quite a couple of years in the Millennium Dome. So I sort of did a real variety of jobs, and I kind of look back at it all now and I think, God, that was really random and not particularly sort of. There wasn't an overriding goal that worked out through there.
Oh, I don't know. I can see a few. I mean, from what you've now built, I mean, photography, you have to have really an eye for a shot, and it's not easy to, especially under pressure, the paparazzi at times, you've kind of got to be able to get your shot in deadline for whatever publication it is. And obviously the diving, there's an obvious link with what you've gone on to do, and big sets and things like that, you have to have that sort of capability of pulling things like that together as well.
Definitely. I mean, that a big part of my projects now is logistics and really getting away from that kind of desktop scale that you learn at art college. It's really now, I'm forced to produce works that even in the studio they look enormous, but as soon as I put them into the underwater world where it's so vast, they really disappear and shrink out of sight. So it's a huge part trying to work out how to make enough artworks that it becomes a tool that will attract people's attention for long enough. And also create reefs on a pretty large scale. So
because I mean it is a stage set essentially what you're creating. You I mean, I know that you do isolated pieces, but often they are ensembles, aren't they?
Yes, very much so. They're for me, they're just full on construction projects, and the types of machinery and skills that we use are pretty similar to lots of parts of the construction industry. So,
well,
yes.
I think the construction industry needs a creative side to it as well. I mean, all those skills. I'm always stealing, particularly tools from other industries. I go to the dentist and come out thinking, oh, I'm going to buy myself one of those, whatever he's just used, on my tooth to drill. And same with the construction, really. So what was the first paying gig? When did it become a profession rather than something you were doing as well as work?
I sort of had this tentative plan to earn my living in a different career and then go back to art when I was a bit older, and I could just do it as a sort of a hobby, but a kind of serious hobby. But I became more and more disillusioned with sort of working in jobs I didn't particularly enjoy. So I thought, right, I'm just going to take a year out, not worry about whether I can pay the rent with the artwork. And I just took a year and experimented, and I was lucky enough to be living in the Caribbean at the time, so I was working as a diving instructor there. And I just started producing sculptures and got in touch with the government and made a proposal that I self-funded, and thought of it as that. It would just be a year out, I'd do something interesting and see where it led. After a year of doing that and having quite a bit of success with a lot of places publicating my work, I got a job in Mexico. They contacted me to build an installation for their marine park, and they were finding that it was being overly visited by too many tourists, and they were damaging parts of the reef. So they started closing parts of the reefs, and that in turn, the tourism industry said, well, if you're closing the reefs, you have to offer an alternative. And so they sort of found out about me, and we began consulting for a few years. And that was probably my first sort of major paying gig, as it were.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. So I kind of pictured you maybe as having some kind of eco-warrior mother or father figure in your life, but it sounds like the interest came later.
Not necessarily. I mean, my parents were actually teachers, so we used to travel the world to different corners. We lived in Malaysia for quite a few years, and so I was quite fortunate at that time to be able to sort of go to all these pristine islands and snorkel these amazing reefs. And so I did sort of develop a kind of love for the ocean and conservation quite early on. But no, they're not eco warriors, and I think I've had quite a normal sort of British upbringing, in my sort of teenage years.
One of the parts that you do see is the characterization in a lot of your sculptures. When I listened to your TED talk, which was fantastic, by the way, I did think that you were incredibly modest about your sculptural work. You were talking very much about how the wildlife that in the sea, it was very much a feeling that they added much more to your sculpture, and they do, obviously, they bring a whole other dimension to your work, but actually the sculptures themselves are fantastic. So what I was really asking is about the interest in the different characters that you sort of have and how you bring those to life.
Yes, that's what obviously really critical part, and I think my work sort of lives in two realities. It has this sort of complete digital life where I think 90% of people who know about my work have only seen it reproduced. Only a small percentage actually see it in person, and as such, it goes through all these stages that I document, and people see it at various points along that journey. But yes, certainly I do put a lot of attention into finishing the works and making sure all the personalities involved come through.
Where do those come from, those ideas? Is that too difficult a question?
They're constantly flowing. It's trying to pin them down and turn them into something tangible. Yeah, I mean, obviously working in different places around the world, I try to make each one of the installations as relevant and meaningful to the local community as possible. So a lot of the characters involved in the projects are local residents or people who are very connected to the sea.
Right.
But again, I've also produced, I think, 1,000 sculptures now, so each one has a kind of different aim or agenda. But many of the pieces, we work with them and they're really detailed, and we spend hours and hours sculpting them, and within like 2 or 3 weeks underwater, all that detailing has been lost.
Well, I did think that's the only part of it, and I know that is so beautiful to see how they do change and develop. But then I'm like, oh no, I can't see that little detail that was so clever in the face, like just the little bits of personality that you've taken the trouble to include are no longer visible, and I know that's part of what you want to see, but then on the other hand I can't bear it.
Yes, I mean it's sort of a real sense of letting go, and it's one of the reasons why I do spend an incredible amount of time and effort and resources documenting them really, really closely, and especially in the early days I really do make sure I'm heavily photograph or scan all of the sculptures in that phase. But yes, I'm actually doing a piece at the moment where I made these lions that have just taken almost a year of carving and grinding and polishing and sanding, and we've just been sort of destroying them with graffiti and damaging them.
Yeah.
And these are not even going underwater.
Oh wow.
They're for an exhibition. But yeah, I'm quite interested in that sort of that sense of loss and that sense of change, that we're always changing and evolving.
So do you set aside time to feed that flow of ideas, or is it part of your creative day, or is it happening while you're chiseling away?
That is a continuous battle, basically. The biggest thing, the sort of biggest conflict is, trying to sort of let ideas flow and evolve and have time to think about things. But on the other hand, you also have huge logistical, contractual things, cultural things. There's so many different parameters to actually executing the projects. So it's a bit of a battle.
So what's the creative routine like at your day?
It's a bit of a mix. I have probably half the time in an office space, working through designs on a computer or on 3D software, and then there's probably half the day in the studio experimenting with maquettes or paintings or smaller versions, and then probably also supervising some of the bigger works as well. So.
Gosh,
yeah.
And then the logistics on top of that, is that another part of you've got to squeeze in as well?
Yes, it is pretty full on. And what's quite interesting is I sort of have people that come and help me, obviously, on each of the projects and share some of the workload, and they've worked in other different fields, and they just can't believe how difficult working in the arts is, because there's no sort of standardized model that they can apply, and there's no routine. Every job is very different and has very different, well, in my case, different countries, different cultures, different designs. Often I change the materials or test out new ideas, and so they're constantly bewildered, thinking, we've just learnt this process and now we're applying it in a different way.
Yeah, I can sympathise with that. We have, I mean, we have similar sorts of issues. Every statue we go on, environmentally, it's changed for a different reason. It might be to do with just the weather, or it could be to do with the way that people are constantly touching the object, or there's every single situation is completely different. And so it's really hard to train people, because they never get, well, for you've got big projects at a time, but for us, we don't get long enough on an object before they've gone on to the next one, and actually you need quite a lot of time and repetition to get really expert at one particular aspect of it. So
no, definitely and I'm also, every time we're trying to sort of improve the environmental footprint of the materials, so there's always a constant pressure to try and make things better and test new things out, and it's really, really challenging within the spaces between projects.
I'm quite interested actually in the materials, and particularly actually the fixing the sculptures. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, obviously, one of the biggest things, I mean, that's a bit of a generalization, but a lot of public sculpture has metals involved,
Yes.
has either foundry work or armatures or sheet material, whereas I don't use any metals at all because they generally tend to corrode, and they don't produce very good artificial reefs.
No.
So I have used some. I occasionally use high-grade stainless steel if I'm designing architectural pieces, but most of the time we try to make all the sculptures completely inert. So that poses obviously some big structural issues. How do you reinforce delicate areas? How do you make thin ankles on a figure? And it also is about trying to make the surface of the material pH neutral and acceptable for coral to adhere to.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's got a few different challenges on that, and generally it means that the works become extremely heavy because we're making very robust, large-scale works that will stay on the seabed in case there's a hurricane or a cyclone.
So you just completely now made me think, well, how does he make the ankles strong enough to support the body? What are you using?
It's a magic.
I was going to say, I need to
magic
know.
rebar, yes. Yes, no, it's definitely a bit of a challenge. We actually use a type of fiberglass rebar, and a type of basalt it's like volcanic basalt that's been woven into strands. That's very effective. We just do what many sculptors have done over the years and support figures with additional parts of the set. So yeah, there's certainly a few challenges, or sometimes we just upscale the work. So some of the pieces can end up weighing 40 or 50 tons, and that generally secures the ankles.
I think material stuff. I mean, I did for my undergraduate as history of art with material science, and the reason they said at the beginning when I was interviewed, we've never had a student want to do material science with history of art, and I was like, but it makes complete sense if you're going into something like conservation, because materials and understanding them and the potentials can solve lots of problems if you go outside of just what is being used every day by, that usually commercial off-the-shelf products are the easy thing, but actually there's so many solutions to problems if you've just got the time to dig in and really understand different sorts of options.
Definitely. I mean, some of the interesting things. I mean, bamboo, I realise, is a very good reinforcer for cement, which is quite interesting, and really low tech. But yes, I mean, what we've been trying to do recently is to sort of offset the carbon footprint of everything we do, and that's proving to be really, really difficult and complex. Where we can find the right materials which capture the carbon, and we can sequester them inside the sculptures, but just sourcing those materials and getting them to the area of the project uses up more carbon. Uses up more carbon than it actually sequesters. So yeah, we really sort of finding it quite hard to do that. The only way to really do it is we've been trying to buy land to plant trees to offset it. But it still doesn't feel 100% the solution.
Yeah, but the thing is that the more we go along and the more awareness there is about this, the more solutions, the more companies will be trying to provide these solutions. I think it's kind of in its infancy at the moment still, even though it's been topical for a very long time. People are just sort of trying to slot these things in. So I've got great hopes for it kind of being a greener field eventually, art. But there's certainly a big gaps at the moment. So, I mean, do you have days where you just think, I wish I'd done something else?
Oh, that's probably, every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. Yes, yeah, definitely, all the time. I can't begin to explain the difficulties that we've had over the years. Yeah, we've had huge challenge. And probably one of the biggest things that people you wouldn't really think would affect you, but it's politics. And politics is just weaves its way into all my projects and causes all sorts of different issues.
Is that people
Um,
asking things of you?
oh, it's just, I think when there's anything public that's happening, it becomes a perfect vehicle for politicians to subvert. And so from that, we did a project in the Maldives where the government smashed it up and made it into a sort of PR
Oh
exercise.
no.
I've had governments that are being sponsored by rival artists, rival artists that also try to sort of censor the work. We've had politicians that have actually stolen money from the grants that were issued.
Gosh.
All sorts of different dramas have happened because we're also working in very different locations, and that has tended to be the most sort of stressful part.
Gosh, it sounds incredibly stressful. I mean, it's sort of bad. It's hard enough to run a business, I think, in the creative industries. But having actually governments who've got an awful lot of power and weight to be muscling in as well, I can't even imagine how hard that would be.
Yes, well, I'm generalising as always, but not every project has been that way. But there's certainly, it's always the things that you just don't expect to come
Yeah.
up that are the things that kind of wipe you off your feet. Whereas the things you really plan for and tries to sort of minimise, they never crop up. But
What about some advice for others thinking about becoming a professional sculptor? Would you encourage them, or would you not?
yes, of course, certainly it's incredibly fulfilling and it's for me, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. So, for years I spent so much of my time worrying about, what career should I do and what is this right and is that wrong. And as soon as I discovered sculpture, that all those doubts completely, disappeared, and I just knew this is what I was going to be doing. But I think for new sculptors starting out, I think it's just a case of not thinking of it as instant success and it will you'll be thriving and making a living after 6 months. I think you've really got to be committed to a very, very long time. And I think I remember listening to some of the lectures with Grayson Perry, and he was very much, it took him sort of 10 or 15 years to really sort of get established. And I think that's how you sort of almost, need to approach it.
So, do you think though that the fact that your sculpture it's making a difference, it's bigger than just the art? Do you think that those two things coming together is also, I don't know, it gives you even more purpose because you're dealing with a big picture?
Yes, certainly. I think that's one of been the overriding motivations for all the projects. I am, extremely concerned about the damage that we're inflicting on our natural world, and just in my small, short lifetime, we've had such a dramatic impact, and I've seen so many different ecosystems decimated that I really feel that with my artwork I can't talk about anything else. It's something that's going to affect my children, everybody's children for generations to come. So if my work can in some small way help talk about that issue or bring about any kind of social change, then I think that's a good thing.
So, can you tell people where they can find out a little bit more about you if they'd like to?
I'm sure, certainly. I mean, all my work is online at www.underwatersculpture.com, and you can also follow my work on Instagram, and that is Jason deCaires Taylor. It's JasonDeCairestayLor.
And do you like social media? Is it something you enjoy doing or not so
Absolutely
much?
despise it. But I understand it's a necessary evil and is a way of networking and a way of connecting to a lot of people. But I relish the day when I can just delete all the apps from my phone
And just
and
have
forget
a
about it.
slightly more peaceful
Yes,
day at
yes, for
work.
sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
Oh, thank you ever so much for talking to us today, Jason. I've really appreciated it. Jason is the first sculptor I've interviewed who's answered no when asked my leading question about the origins of their creativity. And you may think I'm mad to keep asking the same question over and over again, but I was hoping and desperately praying that we wouldn't get to the end of a whole season and find that everyone was born with a pencil in their hands. And he's such a great example that that's not necessarily the case. I think it's inspiring to know that creativity can bloom at any time in your life. It doesn't have to be in those early years, and this is very much in line with my own experience. I was a late bloomer, probably not just creatively, but in general, and just because I wasn't interested in creative pursuits as a child, it doesn't necessarily follow that this has defined me. Now, my ears pricked up when he said that once he started recognising that yearning for creativity inside him, he didn't want to burden it with having to make money from it right away or to constrain the creative flow. So he took jobs to pay those bills, which didn't have much to do with creativity in general, and it freed him up to experiment. He didn't want to demand of what was inside him, but instead to cultivate it. And he took a year or two out and spent some serious time on a hobby which fueled the themes of his sculpture, and he gave himself over to exploring those ideas. Now, taking a year out of your life isn't an option for everyone, and I've got to say I've been trying to attend a writing retreat for about 3 years now, and that only needs to be 2 days away, but I still haven't managed it. But there is always time. You can make time to close yourself off and feed that creativity, that creative yearning inside you. I draw my inspiration from sculpture, and Jason drew it from what he was seeing under the sea. And taking yourself to a place where you can be alone with it enables you to dive into your creative self and discover what there might be there. Just a little and often approach can work. It can be enough to cultivate something which one day may grow into an income stream. And that is certainly how it's happened for me. I was thinking about creativity without the financial aim being in sight at the beginning, and it was a freeing way of gaining momentum bit by bit and learning to trust emergence. And that's when something surprising can show up in your work. Now, Jason has a passion and a cause that drives his sculpture, but even with these rock-solid foundations, I thought it was interesting that he said that it was no instant overnight success. 10 to 15 years, he says, is what kind of time you should be thinking about to become established. So months, weeks, no good whatsoever. It's a slow-growing process. And that really gives me hope. And I hope to everyone who's listening who has a little pursuit on the side. I started publishing in 2015, and I hope that by 2030 I might have written something really significant. Not quite sure what that is yet, but it will be interesting to see. But I do know that there's one thing I can be sure of. It will certainly be about sculpture. And our final episode is with a sculptural titan, Philip Jackson, who is everyone's my favourite creator, but he really is something very special. There are so many amazing public sculptures that he has made, and I'm going to struggle to list them all. Young Mozart in Mayfair, the Jersey Liberation sculpture, the Bomber Command in Green Park, Wallenberg in central London, the Queen at Windsor, the Yomper, also known as the Falklands War sculpture. Just so many that I could go on, and he's been a particularly significant sculptor in my career as a conservator, because I've worked on so many of his monuments, and it's really given me a chance to study the kind of creations he produces, and they are enthralling and clever and eloquent. So please join me next week and be inspired by sculpture. If you're looking for a new book, please consider one of my novels about the dark side of the art world, where sculpture is always at the heart of the story. You can get them on the show website, on the usual online retailers, or even better, keep your local library alive, ask for them in there. Thank you for joining me today. Sculpture Vulture has been brought to you by Antique Bronze.